There have been reports this week in the Financial Times suggesting that President Zelensky is planning to announce elections and a referendum, and that the announcement, according to the FT, would likely come around the time of the 4th anniversary of the conflict coming up in the next 2 weeks. He denied that overwhelmingly. And this weekend at the Munich Security Conference is seen as another key moment to get a steer of the US, positioning how the Trump administration is attempting to manoeuvre in mediating an end to the conflict by the summer. That's what President Zelensky said. He's been told this week that is the current framework set out by Washington. So let's go back to the Munich Security Conference. Let's bring in Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the former Ukrainian Prime Minister who served, as I mentioned, a critical time in the recent history of the country, 2014 to 2016. Good to see you this evening. Welcome to France 24. Let me ask you, what are you hoping for? What are you hoping will come from the Munich Security Conference? How significant do you see this weekend being?
Well, we actually got what was needed a few days ago. During the Ramstein meeting, a number of our allies pledged around $68 billion in military support to Ukraine. You know, all these conferences, it's a perfect spot to debate, to meet, to deliberate on the future of the world and to try to read how to mend defenses with Americans. But that's not the place where we can get real deliverables. But Ramstein, this group of Ukraine, is a real place where people make action and undertake actions in order to provide Ukraine with the necessary ammo, the air defense system, what is needed for Ukraine to prevail in this war.
I mentioned at the top of the programme that, according to the Kiel Institute, their report yesterday, that aid, both military and humanitarian support for Ukraine, dropping annually 99% if you compare it from an average on the years 2022, 23, 24, compared to last year's significant drop. And then the question therefore is, and you touched upon it a moment ago, how much then is supplied by Europe in the vacuum of that? Let me quote some figures to you that have come from there in terms of who's spending what on defence when it comes to protecting wider European security and when it comes to bolstering NATO. Lithuania, defence spending from 2014 to 2024 has risen in that time 550%. Latvia up 350%. Poland up 241%. Denmark 140%. Norway 40% up in those 10 years. Germany up 102%. Germany has now the biggest defence budget in Europe. It's overtaken Britain. We still hear from Kyiv the worry that that's not effectively bridging a solution. It's still not enough for the defence Ukraine needs. What are you making of the support from Europe right now?
Look, here is my take. You're absolutely right saying that Americans practically refuse to finance Ukrainian both military and Ukraine's economy. And it brings me to my next point. But Europe managed to support Ukraine. Europe actually squared the wagons and the way how to provide necessary support for Ukraine. And let me remind you that Europeans pay directly to Americans via Pearl program and purchase Americans' ammo for Ukraine's military. So in terms of overall financial support, I'm going to give you some numbers. In a few days on the February, we're going to commemorate the start of the war that Russia waged against Ukraine in 2014. I want to remind you, viewers, that the war started not in 2022. The war started after suspected war criminal Putin illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. So this war is going on for 12 years. And could you imagine that Ukraine and its allies spent around $450 billion in the last 12 years? And Russia spent around $800 billion to prosecute the war. So, to put it in a nutshell, Europeans did a good job in substituting Americans and in defending both European and Ukrainian security. That's not a donation. This is the contribution to every single country's security, as we are fighting for Ukraine and we are defending alliance, NATO member states, and the entire EU.
I mentioned countries.
Definitely.
Do go on. I wanted to briefly mention, I mentioned countries there that were east and north of Berlin. I didn't mention those west of Berlin. We know Spain isn't meeting its NATO contribution. Britain's defence budget, in that time that I gave for the other, significant increases. So this is from 2014 again, the start of the annexation of Crimea, to 2024, that 10-year period, Britain's defence budget up by 28%. The French defence budget up by 24%. Now, when you look at that compared to what's going on in the east and the north, is that okay?
Well, we should ask those who do not pay their fair share. The reason of the surge in military expenditures is very clear. Every single nation that you mentioned invests in its own security. So people want to get a secure space. And this is not a charity. This is an investment in European security by helping Ukraine's military. We as Ukrainians are paying the highest price for the overall security, because we are losing Ukrainian men and women in the uniform. But we've shown to everyone, and mainly to Putin, that his idea is to outwit and to outlast us won't work. This is futile idea. Going back to the question once again that you raised, this is a wake-up call of the entire world after that we have to pay more for our defense. And I can hardly imagine the governments of the countries that you mentioned who decided to skip this overall trend in increasing of the military expenditures. Because you can't have prosperous countries without strong security.
You've had political disagreements with President Zelensky in the past, and your thoughts on him. You've also protected him. You criticised him in the lead up to the conflict, a lack of preparedness. I think I'm right in saying that you said you also gave him some protection, as you see it, when he was met with the White House row against President Trump, saying that he's a legitimate leader. Right now, with the Financial Times reporting that it has credible evidence, it says that there might be an announcement coming very soon of an election, a possible referendum on any peace terms, despite we're in the middle of martial law in Ukraine right now. Are those things right now, is that the way to go?
Well, let me be very clear. I don't see the case scenario to hold free and fair elections in Ukraine without an unconditional ceasefire. There is no way to cast the ballots under the Russian missiles and under the Russian shelling. President Zelensky is a legitimate president, and under the martial law, he has full authority to be both the president and the commander-in-chief. You're absolutely right that we are not friends with President Zelensky, but as a citizen, I have to rally around the flag. And that's an overall sentiment among the majority of Ukrainian population. First, we need to win the war. And only afterwards, having free and fair democratic elections, Ukrainian people will decide who's gonna govern Ukraine.
In the midst of the recent corruption allegations that really sunk to the heart of government in Ukraine, Arseniy. There were calls, I spoke fairly recently to Kira Rudik, opposition leader, who said that she wanted to see President Zelensky step down. Now is the time, she said. She put together a petition calling for that. How do you sit on that? Would you agree with Kira Rudik that it was time for him to go in the midst of that deal? Or do you think that moment's passed now, that he has to carry on? He is the wartime leader.
I strongly object these kind of irresponsible calls. You're absolutely right that there is a anti-corruption probe. And I see it as an advantage, but not as a disadvantage. Because all these anti-corruption bodies have been established by my government. Anti-Corruption Bureau, Electronic Declaration, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, Special Anti-Corruption Court. It was completely unimaginable to have high-profile Ukrainian officials to be under anti-corruption probe 12 years ago. So now we are on the right track. Those who committed corruption crimes have to be prosecuted, period. It's up to the anti-corruption agencies and anti-corruption court to bring them to justice. Corruption is completely unacceptable in the times of war. But let's split the office of the president and the probe that is conducting. The president has no authority to stop any kind of investigation. And even more, last year, there was an idea to strip anti-corruption bodies out of its independence. And the House passed a special bill. And the president had to veto the bill, both under the pressure of our allies and Ukrainian people. But he has made the right choice, actually, to lead the anti-corruption efforts, but not to impede them. Let me once again reiterate the message. Ukrainian people will decide who's going to be the next president and who's going to be in the next Ukrainian parliament. But only after we reach the real peace deal or a full-fledged armistice agreement. And under these kind of circumstances, we will hold free and fair elections. Now everyone who wants either to hold elections or to depose Ukrainian commander-in-chief pour the gasoline into the Russian fire.
Yes.
So this would create fissures in Ukrainian society. The president has realized that he needs to get the support of Ukrainian people and to maintain this support. So he has to be on the right side of the history.
Let me ask you briefly on that point, because there will come a time, let's say there is a time where we have a ceasefire and we are able to see elections, we're able to see a referendum on any deal. And that at the moment is an unrelenting rhetoric from Putin to say that Russia wants the remainder of the Donbass. In that scenario that you're asked to vote, do you give up the Donbass for peace? What do you say?
Well, I just conducted the latest poll. And you know that only 20% of Ukrainians believe that if Ukraine cedes the territory, Putin is ready to start the peace deal. 80% of Ukrainians, they are not idiots. They clearly understand that this is a trap. And Putin would never deliver the real peace in Ukraine unless he reaches his maximalistic demands. So his ultimate goal is to annihilate Ukraine. And this is the very reason why we need more support. And we have to realize that right now Putin is not acting in any kind of good faith. KGB operatives never act in good faith. So he pretends that he's negotiating. He has changed his entire negotiating team. So he has reappointed this no-name guy, which is Medinsky, to hold new talks in Geneva. This is a clear-cut sign that Putin is not eager to cut any kind of peace deal. It's like sham talks. He's just trying to drag key speed and to outwit and to outlast. It's a smoke and mirror KGB operation.
Your thoughts on that are very clear. Thank you for your time tonight, former Prime Minister. Thank you. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine.